Hey guys, let's start the hip. I know this looks like a pretty daunting bird to start up, especially the first time you get in here and see all the switches and buttons and levers and knobs and things, but I promise you it's really not that bad. The startup is actually comparable to pretty much any airframe that has onboard air and power. And this won't be like a full checklist startup, this is more of my abbreviated startup. That'll get you in the air with everything on that you need to know. But the difference here is, well, I've had a problem in the past where I take a tutorial on a cold start, and what I come out of it with is I turn on this switch because the nice man on YouTube told me to turn on this switch, but I don't really understand what it is, what it does, or why it's important. So as we go through this, I'm going to try to explain those three things about everything that we turn on, so that when you're done, you understand why we turned things on, why we did it in the order we did, why they're important. Not just, here's the list of switches to turn on, here's the order to do it in. I'm hoping it'll be a little more meaningful than that. So most of this will happen from the middle seat. That's this guy here. He's called the flight engineer. There's also that guy over there. He's the pilot navigator, and I'm currently sitting in the pilot commander's seat. Now the flight engineer, because he's in the middle, has access to pretty much everything with ease. He can see everything and he can reach almost everything, and that's what we need since startup involves switches from all over the cockpit, not just on one side. Couple of hinds flying over. I can't wait till those are flyable. Should be a lot of fun. Anyway, let's jump into the startup here. So the first thing we want to do before we get into the middle is actually from the pilot commander seat. We need to do three things. First, we need to turn off the rotor brake. That's this lever here. Think of it like your emergency brake in your car. You're not going anywhere with that brake on, just like the rotor blades are not going to start turning with that brake on. On the left side of your seat, you have your collective, and then you have the engine condition levers. On the collective, you have a twist. This is your throttle. For startup, we want it at minimum. Later, it'll go to max, but for startup, turn it all the way left to minimum. And then these two engine condition levers are kind of a governor, and those should be right in the middle. So depending on how you have them mapped, you may have to adjust those positions, but they should come up and kind of snap to in the middle. And then make sure this is all the way left. All right, and that's all we do in this seat for the moment. So if we hit 3 on the keyboard, we'll jump into the middle seat, and you can see already, like, the view is so much better. You have access to the entire circuit breaker panel up here and to both sides with ease. This is really where you want to be for most of the startup. So to start the engines, like many other airframes, you need three things. You need power, you need fuel, and you need air. So to get the first one of those, we need power. We're going to come over here to the far right side of the bird. And there's two panels. There's a DC power and an AC power. We need to have our batteries from the DC power turned on. Right click them. And we need to have the inverters on as well. Once those are on, then we come up here to our great big circuit breaker panel. And I'm going to try to show you what's on that a little bit. Alright, so you can kind of see there's weapons on this side. It's divided into two different panels. On the left side is these 3 banks of switches that are all for different weapons. And on the right, there are 6 banks of switches, which are for all the different systems. So you can see things like autopilots, radios, fire extinguishers, dust protection, countermeasures, anti-icing, engine start. Like, all that stuff is on here. Now, all of these need to be turned on, with the exception of perhaps anti-icing. If you're flying somewhere hot, like Persian Gulf, you're probably not going to need that. But you can go through and you can click these one at a time and turn them all on if you want to. It's reasonably satisfying to do that. There's also this little handle here. You can click this bracket and lift up the entire bank of switches all at once. So the next bank, I can just lift the whole bank up at one time. And there's also a handy little keyboard shortcut, which is right control, right shift, and the number of the bank you want to turn on. So in order, that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. In our case, we don't need 1, 2, and 3. They're for weapons. We're just doing 4 through 9. So we hold right control, right shift, and then press 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, which is a lot of fun. All right. So now we have power. Next thing we need is fuel. And we do all that from right here in front of us. We have our fuel shutoff valves. They both need to be up. And then we have 3 fuel tanks in here. We've got a service tank that's right in the center line in the back. And then we have a left fuel tank and a right fuel tank, and those are the ones that hang off the side of the helicopter body. And if I switch to the external view, you can see the left one there and the right one over here. Those two pods that extend off the side of the helicopter body, those are fuel tanks. All right, so while we're doing that, it's also a good idea, since we're right here, turn on the fire suppression system. Okay, so now we have fuel and we have power. The last thing we need is air, and that comes from our APU, or auxiliary power unit. This is basically just an air compressor. You turn it on and it fills a tank of air and compresses it, and then we use that compressed air to start the main two engines, which are air started. And they require a lot of air and a lot of air pressure. So to start the APU, we just flip the switch up to start and hit the start button, and it'll fire up on its own. We can watch that on these two gauges here. EGT, exhaust gas temperature for the APU, will start to climb and stabilize, and then air pressure as well, as it starts bringing in air into the tank. Awesome. Okay, so once that's up, we have power, we have fuel, and we have air. We can crank our engines. Now, if we look over and see that smoke over there, it's kind of blowing left to right-ish, right? And we want to start our engines, because we have two of them. We want to start the downwind engine first, because what's going to happen is its hot exhaust is going to blow in the direction of the wind, so it's going to blow off to the right. We don't want the unstarted engine to suck in the hot exhaust air. We want it to be able to suck in cold, fresh air when it starts up. So we start the right engine first, so the exhaust heads off in that direction safely and leaves the left engine exposed to nothing but cold air. So we flip our starter select to right, and then we flip this to start and hit the start button. Now if we come over to the pilot commander's instrument panel, down at the bottom here is our engine RPM, and you'll see engine 2, that's the right one, will start to climb. It's only going to go to just over 20%, and then it's going to stop. And the reason for that is there's no fuel flowing to the engine right now. We have the tank pumps on, but we don't actually have fuel getting into the engine. And the way we do that is with this lever up here. This is our engine stop. Push that forward and fuel begins to flow into that engine. And now we can see that we'll climb well beyond 20, and it should idle out or level out at about 72%. So in the meantime, if we come out to the external camera, we can see our blades are starting to turn, pick up speed. Alright, so our first engine is started, and we know that in two different ways. One is these lights have gone out, so we know the starter isn't firing anymore. And we know that our engine RPM is leveled out at 72. Give or take, or 70, yeah, 72. Alright, so now we can flip the selector to the left, we leave the mode and start, and we click the button to start the left engine. And it's going to be the exact same thing. It's only going to fire to about 20% RPM or so, and then it needs fuel. So we push this engine stop forward, and fuel begins to flow. Now while we're waiting, there's something that you probably could do before we started this part, depending on what time of day it is and what the lighting is like. There is a flashlight with left Alt and L in DCS, but if you don't want to use that all the time, once you have your batteries on, there are two dome lights you can turn on. There's one up here, and there's one over there, and they can be in both red and white modes. So if you look down to this triangle panel just below the dome light, there's your dome LT, and this can be red or white. I highly recommend, no matter what the lighting conditions are, that you turn these on. Even in bright daylight, I like to put these on white just because this is kind of an old module, and depending on what the lighting conditions are, where the sun is, what the shadows are like, it can be really hard to read your instrument panel. It can get really washed out, or it can get really dark. So having these dome lights on gives you some sort of consistent lighting that'll make sure you can always read those gauges when you need to be able to. Okay, so now we can see our second engine has started up, and we can check that our engine RPM matches as well, about 72. Perfect, our engines are running. So now there's a couple of things we don't need anymore, and one of those is the APU. We can turn that off. And the other one will be power inverter, which we turned on right at the beginning, these two switches here. Those aren't going to be necessary once we switch over to generator power. But we can't fire up the generators yet. If you try, you can turn on generator 1 and 2 and it's going to say fail. And the reason is we still haven't actually turned up the RPM of our engines. So let's hop back into the pilot commander seat with 1 on the keyboard. and we have to turn up these things now. So our engine correction levers, or engine condition levers I should say, they come up all the way and then back off a little bit. And then the throttle comes all the way up to max. And then if you watch your engine RPM and your rotor RPM right above it, your rotor should be at 100% and your engine RPM will stabilize at 85. And you can hear that change in sound as well as the engine's running a lot faster now. So then we look over here, back to our power panel, and now we can safely turn our generators on, 1 and 2. And then we have to turn on these rectifiers, which exist to switch AC power into DC power so we can provide that with the generators during flight. Once we have the generators and the rectifiers on, we can turn off the inverters again, and we're done with that. We're pretty much done with power now. So now we have a started helicopter. We could actually at this point take off and fly around and everything would be fine. But we'd be missing a few things. We'd be missing our ADI, we'd be missing our altimeter, we'd be missing this important fan right here to keep us cool because there's no air conditioning. There's a whole bunch of things that just would not be powered. Navigation, radios, none of that. So at this point we get to turn all that stuff on. As well as backlights, which only work once the generator's on. All these, there should be backlights for these, which aren't on yet. So we're going to work left to right. I'm going to come up here. There are 3 banks of backlights. There's one here. Turn that on. There's another one in the opposite position, way over there. And then there's a third one, which is behind this guy's head. Like, behind his face, which is why I say use that position. So if we hit 3, switch back to the middle. And then we look over here again. There they are. Hiding on the wall right by the door into the cargo area in the back. Okay, so now we have backlights, and it looks great. Everything looks beautiful with those red backlights on. So let's resume turning things on. So from the left side we have this triangle panel right here over the pilot commander. And we get to turn on basically everything. So our dome light's on already. We're going to turn on the fan to keep cool. This is our ADI on the left side. Now the gyro cutout switch is, the simplest way to explain it is to just say that it reduces errors that build up in this over time thanks to different flights. So acceleration, stopping, bank turns, they will cause errors to accumulate in this as well as in the gyro compass over time. And the gyro cutout does its best to reduce or eliminate that. We also get to turn on the pitch limiting system. This is for the tail rotor, which sort of dampens our inputs a little bit, gives us more stable control over yaw, which we want. And then last is the audio warning system, which when we turn that on, if we don't hear a woman's voice yelling at us, it means we've done something right. Then we move across. Now, here's all just weapon panels, which we don't have to worry about for now, and anti-icing. There's some radio stuff here we're not going to do for now. We did all of our circuit breakers, they're good. Fire protection system, starter panel, APU panel. We've turned our APU off already. Heaters, in case it's freezing. This is the radio navigation here, which we don't need. And then we get to the next triangle panel over the pilot navigator. Now we get to turn on just about everything here. So this one is the power for our Doppler navigation system, which we'll get to in a separate video, but this is the main way that you navigate in the HIP. And it's actually really precise as long as you're flying the helicopter smoothly. It can get you to a destination a very long distance away with a very high degree of accuracy. It's quite impressive, if a little bit clunky to use. This one here is the communications radio. This is the high frequency radio, not the main one, the R863 I believe it is, which is the UHF radio. This one is the high frequency. This one here is for our gyro compass. We turn that on. Then this is the lighting for the Doppler nav panel, and that's this panel right down here. The mic switch you don't want to turn on. If you turn that on, you will not be able to use your radios. You will not be able to contact ground crew or talk to anyone on any frequency. I believe this is just for talking internally and for the crew inside, but I could be wrong. Either way, I know don't turn this on. VHF interlock, this is for the VHF navigation radio, which this attempts to stop interference with the main radio that does UHF and VHF. And then the last two, this is our right ADI here, and this is our right fan. Moving right again, we have lights and heaters. These are external lights, which do function. So we have lighting, we have nav lights and formation lights, we have blade tip lights, we have anti-collision lights. Not all of these need to be on all the time. You can decide for yourself which external lights you want to have on. I typically turn on everything except for the anti-collision light because it flashes. And then you have dust protection, which may or may not be important depending on where you are. Because I'm on a dirt runway, I'm going to use that. If you're flying in Persian Gulf, you definitely want that. And then pitot heating, clock and battery heating. Again, it's going to depend where you are. If it's 30 degrees in Persian Gulf, you probably don't need these things on, and you probably don't want them on. But because we are on the Normandy map, and it's about 5 degrees Celsius on this particular day, we want those on. Alright. That is pretty much everything for the upper panels that you'll need to turn on after startup. Remaining would be just down here. There's one or two things left. We turn on our radar altimeter on the pilot commander's instrument panel. And in a minute this will spin back down to 0 and beep at us, and then we can set where we want our altitude warning to be. In the middle panel we have the main radio here, and we have the autopilot panel over here. And these are pretty much the only things we care about for the moment. You can go through and set these to whatever frequency you want. And then your autopilot, you have 3 different autopilots, and these will try to hold different things. So yaw will manage your tail rotor and try to keep you pointing in whatever direction you were pointed in when you let go. This is the main roll and pitch. This is the main one you want to have on. This will try to stabilize your roll and pitch to keep you flying at whatever attitude you had chosen. And then this is your altitude hold, which will only engage if you're at a stable altitude and not climbing or falling more than, I think, 1 meter per second in either direction. It's a little bit finicky, but it works pretty well once it's on, and if you can get all 3 of these engaged into stable level forward flight, you can go hands off entirely in this helicopter, and it'll sort of fly itself, which is pretty cool. Makes it an easy one to fly. Alright, so this is done. Now we can drag this up or down to set where we want. We have to go all the way to 0 to reset it, and then bring it up to whatever altitude we like. I set mine at like 2 or 3 meters usually, so that I know when I'm really close and about to touch down to the ground. That helps me estimate my distance to the ground. That's something I haven't been very good at traditionally. While we're here, we can also uncage our ADI, recenter that. And then we move over to the right side, to the pilot navigator, where we can do the same thing, recenter our ADI on this side. We've got the fuel gauge on this side, a few different things from the pilot side. Now, if we're doing Doppler nav, we have to make sure we turn this on and that we set the map angle we're going to, and that we set the distance we want to go, or if we know it. And then make sure that's on before we leave for navigation. But we're not going to do that right now. That'll be for another video. And then here is the more modern GPS nav, the NS430, which I'm also going to do a separate video for, but know that you can do a slightly more modern navigation using GPS and actual coordinates, rather than just angles and distances. So that's pretty much it for things you need to start in the Mi-8, or the Mi-8. And L control and C will close your doors when you're ready. You can hop back into the pilot commander's seat, and you're ready to go. You have a started up plane, or started up helicopter. The last thing that I tend to do is I fly with the controls indicator on, just because I find it really helpful when trimming to know where the center is, what the game thinks the center of my axis is. I can also see that my brake is on, and if I turn that off, here we go. So that's pretty much it. That's a cold start in the hip. We've covered where you want to sit. We've covered turning on power, on fuel, and air, starting the engines, which order to start them in. We've got our engine RPM up, we've got our generators on, we've got everything, all of our systems turned on. Well, that's it, we're done. Hopefully that all made sense, and I will see you for the next video. Bye-bye.